Do you remember when some of television's biggest stars and most expensive productions crashed and burned so spectacularly that they became legends for all the wrong reasons? The 1980s gave us iconic TV that defined a generation, but it also delivered some of the most shocking failures in broadcast history, shows that had everything going for them until they didn't. These weren't quiet cancellations that slipped away unnoticed. These were expensive disasters, franchise betrayals, and career-defining flops that left network executives scrambling and audiences wondering what went wrong. You're about to revisit 20 shows that promised everything and delivered nothing, programs that were supposed to dominate prime time but instead became cautionary tales whispered in Hollywood boardrooms for decades. Let's start with the one that hurt the most because it involved royalty. You watched Lucille Ball own television for decades. She was the queen, the legend, the woman who could do no wrong in front of a camera. Then in 1986, at 75 years old, she returned with Life with Lucy, and ABC promoted it like the second coming of comedy itself. You expected magic because Lucy always delivered magic. Instead, you got a show that felt tired, strained, and completely out of touch with where comedy had evolved. The network had hyped this comeback so aggressively that when audiences tuned in and found recycled physical comedy routines that felt decades old, the disappointment was crushing. ABC pulled the plug after airing just 8 episodes out of the 13 they'd ordered. Critics called it the biggest sitcom disaster of the decade, and watching Lucy's legacy take that hit felt personal. Yes, you wanted her to go out on top, but definitely not like this. Can you remember the exact moment you realized even legends can miscalculate their moment? Now think bigger, much bigger. Supertrain wasn't just a failure, it was a financial catastrophe that nearly destroyed NBC's credibility. In 1979, the network decided to create what they pitched as Love Boat on Rails, a luxury train setting for episodic drama, with a budget that exceeded $10 million. That made it the most expensive television production in history at that point. You heard the promos promising this revolutionary concept, this engineering marvel of a set, this weekly escape into opulence and adventure, but what you got was cheap-looking production values, terrible scripts, and special effects that looked worse than shows with a fraction of the budget. The train itself was supposed to be the star, this massive technological wonder, but instead it looked like a toy model most of the time. NBC canceled it after 9 episodes, and the financial damage was so severe that heads rolled at the executive level. You watched them try to save face, try to spin it, but everyone knew NBC had just driven their most expensive train straight off a cliff. It's like witnessing something fail so completely that you couldn't look away. Then there was the show that should have dominated because it came from a proven genius. Police Squad arrived in 1982 from the Zucker-Abraham-Zucker team. Fresh off their triumph with Airplane, you knew their comedy, rapid-fire jokes, visual gags, layered 3-deep, absurdist humor that rewarded repeat viewing. ABC gave them 6 episodes, and critics immediately recognized brilliance. The show delivered exactly what Zaz always delivered: dense, intelligent, relentlessly funny comedy that pushed boundaries. But network executives made a fatal decision. They scheduled it against impossible competition, and then publicly stated that the show required too much attention from viewers. They actually said audiences had to watch too carefully to catch all the jokes. ABC canceled it after those 6 episodes, despite rave reviews, despite a devoted cult following forming instantly, despite everything that should have saved it. And years later, those same 6 episodes became the foundation for the Naked Gun film franchise, proving everyone at ABC had been catastrophically wrong. You remember feeling betrayed when they pulled it, knowing you were watching something special die for no good reason. When was the last time you saw executives admit they were too dumb to understand their own programming? Now let's consider what happens when you try to catch lightning twice. MASH ended in 1983 as the most watched finale in television history, a cultural phenomenon that defined quality television. CBS immediately launched AfterMASH, bringing back core cast members in a sequel set at a stateside veterans hospital. You tuned in because you trusted these characters, because MASH had earned decades of your loyalty. The network was expected to dominate ratings all over again. Instead, you watched something that felt hollow and forced, a show that captured none of the original's magic despite having the same talented actors. The chemistry that worked in a Korean War surgical unit evaporated in a Missouri hospital setting. Ratings plummeted so dramatically that AfterMASH sank to 87th place, and CBS canceled it after 2 struggling seasons. You wanted to love it because you loved what came before, but that desperate attempt to recreate perfection just reminded you that some stories should end when they end. How many times have you watched someone trying to recapture their glory days and felt embarrassed for them? ABC thought they could replicate Dynasty's success by spinning off the Colbys in 1985, and they didn't hold back. They cast Charlton Heston, they budgeted it like a primetime soap crown jewel. They promoted it as Dynasty's epic continuation. You watched because Dynasty had trained you to expect glamorous excess, backstabbing intrigue, and shoulder pads that could take out an eye. The Colbys delivered expensive production values, but forgot to include compelling characters or storylines that made you care. The show felt like a photocopy of a photocopy, all the visual style with none of the substance. By its 2nd season, ratings had crashed to 76th place, and ABC canceled it mid-season, quietly folding surviving characters back into Dynasty as if the Colbys had never existed. existed. You felt the network's desperation in every episode, that frantic energy of executives trying to manufacture magic through sheer budget size. When did you learn that throwing money at a problem doesn't automatically solve it? Then there were the high-concept shows that sounded incredible in pitch meetings but collapsed under their own ambition. Manimal premiered in 1983 as NBC's Friday night blockbuster, promising a shape-shifting hero with transformation effects that cost over $1 million. You tuned in for that first episode expecting something revolutionary, a man who could become any animal using those powers to fight crime. What you got was a show that could only afford to show transformations twice per episode, always turning into the same Hawk or Black Panther, because those were the only expensive effects sequences they'd produced. The rest was standard detective drama, padding around those two brief moments of spectacle. NBC pulled it after 8 episodes, and Manimal immediately became a punchline, the go-to reference for shows that promised everything and delivered nothing. You remember laughing at the audacity of it, this expensive failure that thought viewers wouldn't notice they were watching the same transformation footage recycled endlessly. Have you ever bought something based purely on the commercial, only to discover the product was nothing like advertised? Automan tried to capitalize on Tron's visual aesthetic in 1983, giving you a hologram AI cop with glowing neon effects fighting crime alongside his programmer-creator. The high-tech hype was everywhere. NBC positioned this as the future of action television, showing you a world where computers could generate physical heroes. You wanted to believe in this fusion of technology and crime fighting because the concept felt genuinely new, but the execution was tired police procedural plots wrapped in expensive visual effects that looked dated within months. The show burned through its budget trying to maintain those special effects while forgetting to develop characters or stories worth caring about. In the end, NBC aired 12 of the 13 episodes they'd produced before quietly canceling it. You watched it fade away, another victim of prioritizing spectacle over substance, style over storytelling. How often have you seen something flashy and impressive completely forget to have a heart? McLean Stevenson left MASH thinking he'd become a sitcom star in his own right, and Hello, Larry became his third consecutive failed attempt to prove it. The show premiered in 1979 and was so aggressively unfunny that Saturday Night Live mocked it repeatedly in sketches. You watched Stevenson play a radio talk show host dealing with single parenthood, and every joke landed with a thud. Every emotional moment felt manipulative and unearned. NBC actually canceled it, then brought it back in a moment of schedule desperation, then canceled it again, twice rejecting the same failed show. You felt secondhand embarrassment watching Stevenson's career implode in real time. This talented actor who'd made one bad decision, leaving MASH, and then compounded it by choosing terrible vehicles that showcased everything he couldn't do. The show became a cautionary tale about hubris and poor judgment. When did you realize that confidence without talent to back it up is just illusion? Jim Carrey's television debut came with The Duck Factory in 1984, an MTM Productions prestige comedy about workers at an animation studio. MTM had a reputation for quality television, and you expected their craftsmanship to shine through. Instead, NBC buried the show in an impossible time slot, gave it minimal promotion, and canceled it after 13 episodes despite decent reviews. You barely had time to discover Jim Carrey's manic energy before the show vanished. Years later, watching Carrey become a massive film star, you looked back at The Duck Factory as this forgotten footnote, this missed opportunity where a network failed to recognize or nurture obvious talent. The show itself was fine, competent, occasionally funny, but NBC treated it like an obligation rather than an opportunity. Have you ever watched someone with obvious potential get completely wasted by people who didn't see what they had? Some failures feel like sacrilege, and Casablanca was exactly that. The 1942 film is sacred, untouchable, one of cinema's perfect achievements. In 1983, NBC decided to create a television series continuing Rick's story, casting David Soul in Humphrey Bogart's iconic role. You knew this was doomed before the first episode aired because some things shouldn't be touched, some legacies shouldn't be commercialized. The show delivered exactly what you feared, a cheap imitation that diminished the original's mystique without offering anything worthwhile in return. Critics used words like sacrilege because that's what it felt like, watching someone desecrate something beautiful for a quick cash grab. NBC canceled it after 5 episodes, and you felt relieved because every episode that aired felt like vandalism. How many times have you watched someone ruin something perfect by refusing to leave it alone? Battlestar Galactica fans got Galactica 1980 and they revolted immediately. The original show, despite its flaws, had maintained a darker, complex tone that respected its audience. The 1980 sequel decided to make everything kid-friendly, featuring child characters and dumbed-down storylines that betrayed everything fans loved about the concept. You tuned in hoping for continuation and got condescension instead, the network assuming you wanted Saturday morning cartoon logic in your primetime science fiction. The fan backlash was immediate and brutal, and ABC canceled it after 10 episodes. You felt insulted because Galactica 1980 treated you like you were too simple to handle the adult storytelling the original had promised. That moment when you realize someone thinks you're stupid enough to accept their inferior product. You remember that feeling. When was the last time you felt completely betrayed by something you'd been loyal to? Cover Up started as a glamorous glamorous spy thriller in 1984, mixing fashion photography with international espionage. Then tragedy struck on set when star John Eric Hexum accidentally shot himself with a prop gun loaded with blanks, dying from the injury. The show halted production after 7 episodes, attempted to continue with a replacement actor, but the shadow of that death hung over everything. You watched those later episodes knowing someone had died making this entertainment, and suddenly the glossy spy adventures felt trivial and grotesque. The show couldn't survive that tragedy. How could it? NBC eventually canceled it, and Cover Up became remembered not for its content, but for that devastating real-life event that overshadowed everything. Have you ever been unable to separate something from the tragedy surrounding it? Jennifer Slept Here gave you Anne Gillian as a sexy ghost haunting a teenage boy, and NBC positioned it as their big supernatural comedy push in 1983. The premise was essentially a male fantasy wrapped in sitcom format, a gorgeous actress playing a ghost who only the teen protagonist could see, creating endless opportunities for innuendo. You watched it and felt the desperation in every joke. This show, trying to be edgy and family-friendly simultaneously and failing at both. The chemistry never worked, the supernatural elements felt like an excuse for lazy writing, and NBC ghosted it after 13 episodes. You remember thinking even the title was trying too hard. This forced wordplay that telegraphed exactly how clever the show thought it was. When did forced quirkiness replace actual creativity in your experience? It's Your Move starred Jason Bateman as a scheming teenager constantly battling his mother's boyfriend in a war of elaborate pranks and psychological manipulation. The show was critically loved for its sharp writing and Bateman's natural charisma, but NBC scheduled it against Dynasty, television's reigning juggernaut. You watched it when you could, appreciating the intelligence of the scripts, but Dynasty's cultural dominance meant It's Your Move never had a chance. After 18 episodes, NBC canceled it despite the critical acclaim, proving that quality doesn't matter when you're programmed to lose. You felt frustrated because this was good television dying, purely because of scheduling stupidity, another casualty of network incompetence rather than creative failure. How many times have you watched something excellent get destroyed by forces having nothing to do with its actual merit? The powers of Matthew Starr tried to blend teenage drama with science fiction in 1982, giving you an alien prince hiding on Earth while attending high school. NBC's big sci-fi bet promised action and adolescent angst in equal measure, but what you got was a show that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a serious sci-fi drama or a teen soap opera, so it failed at both. Midway through the season, NBC completely retooled it, changing the entire premise and tone in a desperate attempt to find an audience. Nothing worked, and they canceled it after 1 season. You watched them panic in real time, throwing changes at the show like someone rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. That moment when you see someone making a mess worse by constantly changing their approach rather than committing to anything. You've seen that before, haven't you? Tales of the Gold Monkey was ABC's attempt to capture Raiders of the Lost Ark's adventure spirit, with a seaplane pilot having exotic adventures in the South Pacific before World War II. The network positioned it as their answer to Indiana Jones, complete with treasure hunts, exotic locations, and Nazi villains. You watched, hoping for that same sense of pulp adventure excitement, and the show delivered competent action without any of the magic that made Raiders special. After 1 season, it sank without a trace, because competent isn't enough when you're trying to compete with cinema's best. ABC pulled it, and you barely noticed it was gone. You'd forgotten most episodes before they even finished airing. When did you learn that imitation rarely captures what made the original special? Misfits of Science featured Courtney Cox and a team of superpowered oddballs fighting crime. NBC's attempt to merge the A-Team's formula with mutant abilities. The concept had potential, diverse characters with different powers working together against threats. The execution was Saturday morning cartoon logic stretched to an hour-long primetime format, treating superpowers like party tricks rather than exploring any real consequences or drama. NBC zapped it after 16 episodes in 1986, and you weren't surprised because Misfits of Science never found its identity beyond people with powers do things. You remember it as a show that had all the pieces but no idea how to assemble them into something coherent. How often have you seen potential completely wasted through a lack of vision? Baby Boom tried to adapt the Diane Keaton film for television in 1988 without Diane Keaton, and that decision doomed it immediately. NBC's prestige dramedy about a career woman suddenly raising a baby promised wit and heart. Without Keaton's specific energy and charisma, you got generic workplace comedy with an adorable baby prop. The laughs weren't there, the ratings weren't there, and NBC canceled it after 13 episodes. You watched it, wondering who thought this would work without the star who made the film successful, like making a Batman movie without Batman and expecting the same results. That moment when you realize someone fundamentally misunderstood what made something good. You've experienced that disappointment, haven't you? The Charmings brought Snow White to suburbia in 1987, an ABC fairy tale sitcom where the classic characters woke up in modern times. The premise was aggressively cheesy, playing fairy tale fish out of water jokes for every possible laugh. You watched 1 episode and understood immediately that this was too silly, too broad, too dismissive of its own concept to sustain a series. ABC pulled it after one season, and you forgot it existed until someone mentioned it years later. The Charmings represented that specific 1980s creative bankruptcy where networks greenlit anything with a gimmick, assuming the hook alone would carry the show. When did you stop being charmed by clever premises that couldn't execute? Finally, Paper Dolls tried to compete with Dynasty in 1984 by giving you Morgan Fairchild and Mimi Rogers in a fashion industry soap opera. ABC positioned it as their Dynasty rival, complete with beautiful people, glamorous settings, and backstabbing drama. You tuned in expecting that addictive soap opera excess, but Paper Dolls felt like a photocopy again, hitting all the expected beats without understanding why those beats worked on Dynasty. After 14 episodes, ABC shredded it, admitting defeat in the primetime soap wars. You watched it fade away, another victim of trying to replicate success rather than creating something original. These shows shocked the industry because they had everything: star power, massive budgets, franchise recognition, and still they failed spectacularly. Which of these failures surprised you most? Let me know in the comments section. For more videos like this, click on this next card on your screen.